guys, happy Wednesday. We are back with our Wednesday lives. I'm so excited to start this new series for the month of September. Our focus this month is going to be about removing the bad out of our life and bringing in all the good. And today's guest, we have a special guest today, which is my friend Charlotte Jones. She is a nurse educator, a nurse advocate, and has been in nursing for 23 years. And today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to her heart. Why? Because she has experienced it firsthand herself. She'll tell you a little bit about her story. But first, welcome, Charlotte. Thanks for being here in Question the Drink. We're so excited to have you. And why don't we start by explaining what compassion fatigue is? That is what we're talking about today. So first, if nobody's ever even heard that term, what is compassion fatigue?
Well, first of all, thank you, Carrie, for having me today. And everyone else that's here, thank you for tuning in. Compassion fatigue is actually, you say it's a term that's not familiar. It's actually more familiar than most people realize it. And I didn't become familiar with it until February. Thanks to Facebook, believe it or not. I was scrolling through the feed and all of a sudden I saw compassion fatigue and I'm like, what is this? And I was curious. And what I found was it's in all different parts of, how do I say this? Not just medicine, but in our lives. Why? Because we're compassionate beings. Mm-hmm. And what's happening basically is when you keep giving and giving and giving of yourself, because you're so wanting to help others, eventually you can exhaust yourself from all the giving that we do. So just us in general, not even being professional caregivers, we can develop compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
That's a really simple explanation without getting too much into it. It's kind of a form of burnout.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I know there's a lot of moms and a lot of parents and even fathers that, you know, if we're taking care of somebody else, this really does affect all of us. And I know you're coming at it from the nursing perspective, but we can definitely look at this also through the lens of anybody who's taking care of somebody. And you know what, with COVID, obviously we're all being affected negatively for the most part. Some of us are actually thriving through it, but most of us are really dealing with the stress. So some of us even have parents at home that we're taking care of, like older parents, or besides the children being home from school. So now that we know what compassion fatigue is, what are some of the signs that we can start to look for? Because maybe some of us are suffering from compassion fatigue and we don't even know it. So what does that look like?
Exactly. And that's exactly what happens, is that some of the symptoms initially start very insidious and you don't even realize they're happening. Mm-hmm. So some good ones are reduction of sleep. You might go down to 3 to 4 hours a night and you may not even realize it because you can wake up feeling refreshed. Starting to have headaches, depersonalization, you're detaching yourself from others. You're pushing your loved ones away because you feel like crap. And you feel like crap and you don't want them to feel like crap. Yeah. What else? Feelings of inequity towards the therapeutic or caregiver relationship, irritability, feelings of self-contempt. Those are just some of the normals. Weight loss, unintentional weight loss. That actually happened to me. I actually lost 10 pounds within 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Why don't we pause here and you tell everybody about your own story with compassion fatigue, because this is literally how you decided to really start focusing on compassion fatigue, particularly for nurses, since you are a nurse advocate. So why don't you tell everybody, and first let me say, for those that are watching, if you have any questions for Charlotte, I am watching the chat or the comment box. So go ahead and put any questions that you might have for her in there. But yeah, please share your story, because it's pretty amazing in 2 weeks what happened to you.
Yeah. So let me go backwards a little bit before I go there, if you don't mind. As we know, in January, all 2020 has been a bit odd for all of us, to say the very least.
Yes.
In January, we started hearing about this little virus called coronavirus. You didn't say it's little anymore, but back in January, it wasn't nearly as known as it is now.
That's right.
And even though I don't generally watch the news, I am aware of a lot of things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And I kept following the trend and kept following it and following it. And I said, I know it's only a matter of time before it gets here. Yeah. And what am I going to be able to do when it does? So in March, I contacted the Board of Nursing in Florida. And because I hadn't been on the floor since 2008, even though I'm still a clinical nurse, basically they said, you can volunteer. Mm-hmm. I said, for all I know, no, thank you. I'll find another way. The end of March, my old employee, who's also a friend of mine, contacted me. She said, I'm going to New York City and you're coming with me. But she's like, I don't care. They're taking everyone. You're going. I said, okay. And I wanted to go. I wanted to help because I'm a helper. We're nurses. We got to help people. So I'll fast forward. I left Sarasota April 5th. I arrived in New York City. I was so excited to be there. I get there, I go through orientation, and they start telling us all these things. And I'm like, oh no, this may not be a good idea. Why? Because basically all the boundaries that you know were kind of out the window. And I'm a boundary person. And I realized very quickly, I'm not good without boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
My first few shifts were amazing. I had a great time. I loved the people I worked with. Awesome. And then April 16th happened. And you don't know me as far as this is concerned, but I was a labor nurse for 9.5 years, and I dealt with high risk. So anyone that's listening, forgive me, but I'm going to make this as quick and painless as I can. I had a lady who had a dead baby inside. She knew it was dead. I don't have a problem with that. Those were my favorite patients. I used to love taking care of them more than anything else. And she was amazing. As amazing as she was, in New York City, I was restricted to do the job that I knew how to do because of how they allow nurses to work on their unit. And it took an hour and a half before the resident finally came in to see my patient. And from the moment I walked in, she was already at a pain scale of a 10 out of 10. And I had to watch her go through the whole delivery process with that pain level.
Did she know at that point that her baby was deceased?
Before, yeah, she knew. When she came to the hospital, she had already known. So it wasn't, don't get me wrong, it's terrible, and it is, but she already knew. So I wasn't dealing with that aspect. But when I've typically dealt with patients under those conditions, they're basically what I would term snowed. Anyone who's a nurse would understand this. We drug the heck out of you because we know you've got to deal with so many psychological issues. We don't want you dealing with the pain. So this poor woman had to deal with the psychological issues and the pain. And because of the caregiver I am, and I forgot to tell everyone I'm an intuitive and an empath on top of everything else. And I forgot to bring my thick skin as the nurse to New York City with me. I left it behind and I got destroyed. And then the following day, and by the way, when all this happened, and I'm leaving out most of the details, I saw everything that was going to happen and the way it was going to happen. And I couldn't say anything because they wouldn't listen. And that's really hard as a nurse because you're part of an interdisciplinary team and you're supposed to be working together as a team. And no one was listening. Next day, I have another client, patient, everything's amazing. It's perfect. She has a perfect delivery, healthy baby boy. Thank you, God. And then she ended up hemorrhaging in the room. And it became an emergency situation that, again, could have been avoided, but it wasn't. So what's this have to do with compassion fatigue? After my second shift, at the end of my shift, the charge nurse said to me, so, Ms. Jones, how's it going? And I said, to be perfectly honest, I think I'm a hindrance to your unit. And she said, I think you just might be.
Oh, wow.
And in that moment, I literally split in two. Literally. I was broken. I don't know how to explain. I couldn't even verbalize what was wrong. I just knew something was really, really wrong. And that night, and thankfully because of everything that had happened, I resigned from my position. I did not fulfill my 21-day contract. However, I'm still in good standing with the company because of how I demobilized. So I can go back to work for them anytime I want. I wouldn't, but I can. And so what happened was I finished the shift and I came back to my hotel and I went to talk to my company and I said, this is my last shift. And they said, well, why? And I said, because I felt helpless. And you just can't do that to a nurse. You can't make a nurse helpless. That is what we're supposed to do. I mean, people in general like to help each other, but this is just destructive. And my girlfriend's like, you need to stay, you need to stay. I'm like, no, I don't. I need to go because this is not my problem. And it wasn't a COVID issue. People are gonna be like, oh, it's COVID. It was labor and delivery. It was not a COVID unit. Yes, we were dealing with COVID, but they were all suffering from compassion fatigue. That whole unit never thought about the needs of the patient first. And I realized that after I came back. And that's why it's so near and dear to me, because I realized if this could happen to me in 2 weeks, and believe it or not, I think it was the greatest blessing that could have happened. I'm grateful that I went in with my intuition full and my empathy wide open versus having that thick skin, because I got to experience that destruction within 2 weeks. Versus most of my other caregivers and other people out in the community are not going to know that for months or even years. And by then, the symptoms may be irreversible.
Yeah.
And you don't want to know what the short-term and long-term effects are going to be. They're going to be catastrophic
Yeah.
unless we intervene.
Well, it's like even with drinking, right? So if we don't catch things, which I'm so glad we're having this conversation about compassion fatigue, because it does align with gray area drinking. If we don't catch our relationship with alcohol early enough, oh yeah, it can be catastrophic, is right. Right.
Yeah.
It leads to alcoholism. People that are in the gray area are not physically addicted to alcohol. So therefore we have a choice. We have a choice in if we want to drink in the direction we want to go. And same thing with compassion fatigue, you guys. So if you are recognizing some of these symptoms with unexplained weight loss, not sleeping well, irritability, snapping at your partner, lashing out at your kids, you know, these are all signs that to pay attention to. And so with that, when somebody feels some of these symptoms and they're like, oh my gosh, maybe I too am suffering from compassion fatigue, even as a parent, right? We don't have to be a labor and delivery nurse. We don't have to be a COVID, working in the COVID unit on the front lines like Charlotte did. We can literally be trying to juggle our homes, our work, and all the stress that we naturally feel on top of everything else is now happening with our country in this world. What are some of the things that people can actually do? What are some practical tips that we can make that will help us in terms of calming ourselves down, self-regulating ourselves? What does that look like?
Okay, well, let's start with the first umbrella term, self-care.
Oh, wow. What's that?
Okay.
Self-investment, right? New term, everyone.
Yeah, new term. We've never heard of it before. Yeah. And that's really why it all comes to begin with. Because if we were filling our own love bucket to begin with and making sure that we had enough to give others, we wouldn't be able to get burnt out to begin with. And yes, it's easier to be preventative and early intervention than to play cleanup. So if we're going to play cleanup, though, one of my favorite things actually is journaling. It's one of the best things you can do. And I love people like, I don't know how to write. I don't write. You don't. You just start writing. You just allow the pen to take over for you. That's a really good way, and it gets a lot of things out on paper, and you don't have to scream at anybody. So
yeah, you can scream on the paper.
That's right.
Yeah.
Music is a great one, especially I believe it's a 528 megahertz music is very good. It helps resonate with your cells, so that's important. Yeah. Neurogenesis, building new brain cells. Neuroplasticity. She's like, oh my God, these big words. So
yes,
let me say neuroplasticity.
We love neuroplasticity in our
love neuroplasticity because truthfully, that's what's going to save us.
Well, let's explain what it is, because you and I know what that is.
But I know, and I'm going to explain it. So neuroplasticity is basically you're creating new neural pathways for the brain. And I'm going to equate it for someone with Alzheimer's because I also happen to be a certified dementia practitioner. So how do you do it? I'll give you something really simplistic to increase brain pathways, which what that does is it engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the feel-good nervous system, the rest and relaxation nervous system, right? Because what's happening currently is you are in the sympathetic nervous system. You are in the state of fight or flight. You are only in survival. And when you are in survival, there's only a few things you do. You have sex, you eat, and you drink. And beyond that, nothing else matters. Thinking is out the window because the amygdala, which is the primitive part of the brain, has taken over. So you want to switch into the parasympathetic, which is the rest and relaxation. So if we create new neural pathways, and here's an easy one. I'm right-handed, okay? Let's just say it's a fork. I know it's a pencil. I'm not demented. I understand that. But let's just say this is a fork, okay? I'm going to start eating with my left hand instead. Why? Yeah. Because it's a new connection for the brain. And I'm going to do it with consistency because that's what cements it. So it's creating all those new pathways. And you can do it in many different ways. You can even do it by, I started in November saying, I just want to be happy. And I made that actual decision. And 70% of my life is made happy now. And most of the time I'm living that parasympathetic state. Yeah. And you're like, well, how do you get there? Right?
Well, I like to use the analogy when I'm explaining to my clients what creating new neural pathways looks like. And I think about, we all have a familiar road that we drive, whether it's, let's say, to the grocery store. You know where your
Hmm.
grocery store is, right? We have the same stop signs, the same stoplights. We're making the rights, we're making the lefts, we're hitting the brake pedal. We're doing all the same familiar things. You can drive to the grocery store without consciously thinking. Why? Because your subconscious is actually the one who's driving the car. Believe it or not, kind of scary when we think about that. So creating a new neural pathway in our brain as is like if we actually put up a detour on the road and we had to take another road or another way to get there, it would make us consciously have to think about how we're going to get to that the grocery store in this new path. So when we think about creating new thinking, we can think about as we're putting up a detour sign and we're going a different route. So that's a quick way to explain it,
Right.
that makes it a
And
little
it's
bit more
healthier.
bite-sized. Yes.
And the other part of that is it's not just like detours are temporary. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the only reason why I don't like detour, even though I get the analogy. How's
Mm-hmm.
that? It's like it's a different route, which is good because you are making it now complex and novel, which is what you want to do. You want to challenge your brain. That's what it's about. How do I make my brain work differently than how it's used to? Why do people start drinking? Because it becomes a habit. And it's not something you can necessarily just dehabitualize. You
Mm-hmm.
have to create another habit to take that place or make a new decision when you make that new habit.
Yes. Yes.
And you do it with
Definitely.
freedom, not with, I have to do it,
Yes. Yeah. We
right?
talk
Because
a lot about that in this group. It's about a choice, right? I'm choosing not to drink versus I can't drink. That just sends so many negatives in our brain, for sure. Another thing
exactly.
I'll say too about our nervous system and moving from a parasympathetic into or a sympathetic into a parasympathetic is by breath. Breath is by far the number one thing that I recommend to instantly calm your central nervous system to a place of calm and rest so that you can think more clearly and get in a centered space. So I also want to throw that in because I love breath work and just even box breathing, which we've done multiple times. We did a segment with my friend Melissa Saubers, who taught breath work on one of these lives about a month ago, and that is something that I would highly recommend.
And if we don't want to just talk about traditional, well, actually this is traditional, but it's not just self-intervention.
Mhm.
Therapy should never be discounted. Medication shouldn't be discounted. I wouldn't go running down that road unless you've been ignoring for so long you have no other options.
Mhm.
Opening up to friends is probably the best thing you can ever do. Relationships are everything. And in this world of COVID or coronavirus, whichever way you want to talk, social isolation is really what's happening. And
Yes.
social distancing, that term has done nothing to help us.
No, it
Physical
has not.
distancing, a whole different story. But
Hmm.
we're already disconnected socially. We've been doing it for years anyway, thanks to these lovely little devices.
That's right.
I mean,
Yep.
that's the reality. So I love when people are like, technology's so amazing. No, it really hasn't been in some ways. It's
It
actually
hasn't.
disconnected us and let's hide behind things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And again, if somebody's just watching or joining us and you have any questions for Charlotte or myself, go ahead and put them in the actual comment box because I am watching that so I can see you guys. So thank you for being here and watching with us. So now that we know how to calm that down, is there besides having the practical tips and everything, what would you suggest if they're like, okay, I tried these self things myself. I feel like I'm a little bit better, but I really need to take it a step further. Is this something like I know you coach, so that is definitely an option, and I definitely want
Mhm.
you to be able to share where people can find you. So why don't you start with that and what that looks like? Like
Okay.
what kind of coaching do you offer for somebody who is suffering from compassion fatigue?
So I offer two different programs actually. I have the 6-month program, which is Heal Your Symptoms. So that's a Band-Aid. And I have the 12-month program, which is Heal Your Life. And it's all
Ah,
depends on what you want. And I'm not going to tell you you're going to get completely healed in a year. I'm saying you're going to get a lot done within a year and a lot more than you would realize. And it's not, I would say my type of coaching is a combination of nursing process. So I do assessments of planning, implementation, evaluation. I work with the nurses in a way that they get to lead because they don't like to be told what to do. Anyone that knows a nurse will tell you that. and they want to feel like they're in control, and they should be, because the truth is what I am teaching them is everything that they really know for themselves. I'm just giving them some guidance.
Yeah.
Guidance that they're not used to, looking at a perspective that we're not used to looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about why do people start drinking, Carrie? And I'll get back to how you can get a hold of me in a second. But the reason you do is typically because you're so overwhelmed and you don't know how to deal with anything. And then it's like, okay, by the time you get to a coach, you're so overwhelmed, we get to untangle all of those entanglements.
Yeah, that's so true. And stress is the number one driver. I mean, this is, at the end of the day, when people come to work with me, it's not about they want to quit drinking, although that is primarily what they think they want to do, or the aspiration is. And if that's all I did, I'm not a sober coach or recovery coach. What I'm doing is helping them uncover what is the root cause of this stress, because that is what we need to work on. And how is alcohol playing a part in your life? So even whether it's compassion fatigue or alcohol or something else, it's getting underneath it. It's like you said, it's like throwing a Band-Aid. Drinking is nothing but a Band-Aid. Just like, the other things that we're doing, whether it's overeating or we're avoiding people, we're seeing in toxic relationships. We've talked about this multiple times, but it's that stress level that drives some of this. And compassion fatigue and taking care of others and not putting yourself first is what will happen with this. And women, men suffer from this, right? Absolutely.
Yes.
Suffer from this. But as women, we tend to have a little bit higher vibration with this, because we are expected to be everything to everyone. We're expected to be the mom, the caregiver to our family, to our husbands, to our workplace, to ourselves. And dang it, we got to look good while doing it too, right? It's like so much pressure on us as women. So not that the guys don't suffer
No,
from it.
no. It has nothing to do with, and we can make it about gender, but it's not. But the truth is, and anyone who knows anything will tell you, men and women's brains are wired differently. It's nothing more. It's not that a man can't be just as compassionate as a woman. Absolutely, they can. But you're right. The expectation of our role is much different, and it does have an impact on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as getting underneath, I like untangling the subconscious thoughts, because those are usually what causes everything. As far as getting a hold of me on LinkedIn, I'm under Charlotte Jones. On Facebook, I'm under Nurse Char, At Your Service Education, and Charlotte Snyder. At Your Service Education has been my company since 2011.
Well, we'll put the links underneath if anybody wants to get a hold of Charlotte. But we're so grateful that you were able to join us today and talk about this very important topic, that it is a real thing, you guys. It's real. Compassion fatigue is real. We suffer from it. All of us have maybe at some point had a touch of it, and we kind of come in and out. But the end result here that I want the takeaway to be is just to be aware and recognize where you are emotionally, as well as you are cognitively, and that you're able to start to acknowledge some of these signs and these symptoms, and just how you're feeling about everything. Because really what we're thinking about is how we're causing these feelings to come up for us, and that actually will drive these actions, whether they're negative or not. So it is something to be aware of. It's a real thing. We need to stay on top of this. In this group, we talk about high performing. We look at all the things to move out of our life so that we can be a better version of ourselves and expand in those areas of our lives. So thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, thank you for being here. We'll put this on YouTube. Charlotte, great to have you today. Thank you so
Carrie.
much. All right. Talk to y'all later.